Hello, everybody. Welcome back to computer programming. This is going to be day 2. Yesterday, we just finished up our design for this thing. There's one other thing that I need to add to this design, but we'll do it in a future video. Right now, we're just going to be focused on the paddle. One quick reminder is I made sure to name everything. My paddle is called paddle. My ball is called ball. My right wall is side 1, my left wall is side 2, and my top wall is top wall. All right, we are going to need to create a couple of events. First, I'm going to click on my form, and I'm going to go into the Thunderbolt over here, and I'm going to create a couple. I'm going to create a load event. We're actually not going to use that event until a couple days from now. But we're just going to put that now. Put that there now. Anyway, we're going to do a key press event because we're going to be moving stuff around with the keyboard. We'll do a key up event because we're going to want to stop moving stuff around with the keyboard. And lastly, but not leastly, we're going to create a paddle timer tick event. So I'm going to double click on my paddle timer, and there we go. So now I've got 4 events. All right. Going to go ahead and close out of my designer. I was doing a little fixing up behind the scenes. All right, let's get our paddle moving. The way I'm going to move my paddle is by pressing the Q and E button. Normally when I'm moving stuff around, I like WASD, but since I'm only going left and right, I want to try something slightly different, so we're going to use Q and E. All right, so first, we need to create a variable to manage moving around our paddle. So I'm going to create a variable here under our partial class form, and I'm going to call it paddle dir. And I'm going to need to tell it what type it is, and it's going to be type bool. Those of you who remember, bool is short for Boolean, which means something is either true or false, which means paddle dir is true or false. I'm actually going to default it, so my initial value for it, I'm going to initialize it right now, is going to be true. And the reason why we're using bool for this is because there's only 2 options for directions our paddle to move, left and right. In the past, we've used strings to do that because a string can be any combination of things. We used up, down, left, and right. But since this is only going left and right, we only need 2 options. And so Boolean is going to be our way of doing that. But that means we're going to have to decide what means what. So paddle dir meaning true, I'm going to say true means going to the right. Notice that I've got 2 slashes in front of here. That means I'm typing in a comment, and the computer is going to skip this part. So typing this is actually not something the computer is going to read at all. So if true means to the right, then false is going to mean to the left. Hey, great. And that's just a note for me to keep in mind. All right, we're going to set up some key press events. Like I said, we're going to want to use E and Q. I'll do Q first. So if E dot keychar, and we've done this a couple times, so feel free to work ahead of me, equals the character Q. I'm also going to add in some robustness into our program. I'm going to say or E dot keychar is capital Q. And that way it's a little more robust. If someone accidentally hits the caps lock, we should still be fine. All right, so if Q or if capital Q, we want to move to the left, which we said left was false. So I'm going to set paddle dir to be false. All right. We're going to do the same thing with E, but before I copy paste this, I'm going to add one more line. When we move, we also want to turn on our paddle timer. Currently, our paddle timer is actually off, or at least it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it, and yep, sure enough, enabled is false. So when we click a button, we want to turn on our paddle timer. Paddle timer.start. Something that might be getting a little confusing with this is that we have something called paddle timer, paddle dir, and then paddle itself. If I was a better programmer, what I might do is include what these things are in the actual name. Paddle timer is a good one. But paddle dir, I should maybe say paddle direction bool, just so I remember it's Boolean. And for paddle itself, I might want to say paddle PB for picture box. That way I keep in mind what properties I actually have access to. All right, now that I've got that, let's copy paste this guy. All right, but instead of Q, we're going to use E. And instead of false, we're going to be using true. All right, great. So as of right now, we've got, if we press Q, it turns paddle timer to false, and if we press E, it turns it to true. This doesn't actually translate into any motion yet. We'll do that in a second. When we key up, that's actually where we're going to stop our timer. So the thing that's actually going to prevent our guy from moving is fully stopping the timer. So paddle timer dot stop. I'm making full use of an IntelliSense right now. It's doing a lot of the typing for me. Awesome. So let's add a little bit of movement to our paddle. So in the paddle timer tick, which is now enabled whenever we press Q or E, we're going to say if paddle dir, then we want to do something. Normally we would say paddle dir is equal to something like true, kind of like we did up here. E.keychar is equal to Q. But with paddle dir itself, because it's Boolean, Boolean means it could be true or false. And that's what the if statement is looking for. It's looking to evaluate this to either true or false. And since it's already that, we don't need to say equals true. It just is true already. Which means the only other option is when it's false. So it's either going to move right or move left, or the paddle's not going to be moving. Which means we don't have to have a second if. We can actually use else. Else means if anything other than this happens. So these two are connected to each other. And if anything other than paddle dir happens, else will happen. Well, there's only two options for paddle dir because it's either true or false. So either this top one happens or the bottom one happens. This is another reason why Boolean is really useful. Okay, so if paddle dir, we want to move our paddle to the right. So I'm going to say, let me get my properties out of the way too. Okay, I'm going to say paddle dot, and we've done this code a couple times before. So again, feel free to zoom ahead. I'm going to hope that it lets, or it wants to auto type for me because I really don't want to type all of this, but I will for the sake of my students. There we go. Oh, thank goodness. All right. I am going to pause real quick and let you guys type this down. So feel free to pause the screen right now. Okay, we're back. Theoretically, you paused there if you needed time to type this in. Okay, so for moving to the right, we want X to have some stuff added to it. So I'm going to say plus 5. I don't know why I use 5 for all of them, but I do. So plus 5. If we're not, we're going to move to the left, which means instead of plus 5, we're going to do minus 5. Notice Y isn't changing. We don't want our paddle to move up and down. We just want it to move left and right. So at this point, stuff should work. Let's try it out. So I'm going to hit E, and I move to the right. I hit Q, and I move to the left. Nothing's happening to my ball, but we haven't programmed that. That's going to be tomorrow's programming. Okay. One problem, though, is that if I move over here, I can actually go through the wall. And we don't really want that. So we're going to add in a little bit of collision, and then we are going to be done for the day on this. All right. So let's create ourselves a custom function, one to deal with collision. I say private void, which just means it's not going to spit out any values. I'm going to say, again, another thing called paddle, although because it's a function, I like to capitalize it. I'm going to say paddle collision. And I'm specifying paddle collision because I'm going to have another collision function, one for the ball, but I'm going to keep them separate. Okay, so what we want to do is say if our paddle, and we've done this code before as well, if our paddle dot bounds dot intersects with the thing that we're trying to hit, which I guess in this case is actually side 2, and this was be side 1. So let's deal with side 2 first. No, we should go in order. I'll say side 1. Side 1 dot bounds. If we hit side 1, that means we are moving too far to the left, which means we need to bounce to the right, which means I'm just going to steal my code up here that moves me to the right and put it in here. I'm going to have another conditional statement. I'm just going to copy paste this whole thing. This one is going to be for side 2. And instead of bouncing us to the right, since side 2 is already on the right, we're going to subtract. Okay, now we are going to end up with a bug here. Let's see what that bug is. So I set up all the code for the collision. I'm going to walk towards the wall, and the astute of you may have realized that it's not actually going to do anything. It's not speeding us up, slowing us down, or anything like that. Any of the normal things that we would expect with a bug here. So what's going on? Well, it's this right here. It says 0 references. We're not actually calling this function. Remember, functions don't do anything unless they're called. So we want every time the paddle timer ticks, every time we move, to check to see if we've collided with anything. So here's where we'll run paddle collision. Now, I hit start. I use E to run all the way over to the wall, and it won't let us through. Let's go check the other one, make sure that works. And perfect. All right, so for the next video, we're going to get the ball moving. It's going to be exciting. That's one of my favorite parts. And then our third day on this is going to be all about getting the blocks up here. All right, thank you for joining me, and have yourself a wonderful day.